UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasions, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Crossfire.
Welcome, everybody, to UAP Crossfire, where we get down to the nitty-gritty of ufology today. What's real, what's not real, and what we don't give a damn about. Well, and that's the bottom truth. We got to strip it off right off like a bad Band-Aid and get to the truth of what's happening today. And so before we do anything, I want to introduce the two co-hosts with me. They are great ufologists. They're doing a great job. And the first one, he's an old legend. He's the silverback of ufology. He is the man with the plans. He is the man with the news. When he talks, he's like E.F. Hutton. Everybody listens. And that's Dandy Don Decker. How are you, Dandy Don?
I'm doing fine, Chris. How about y'all?
Oh, I'm just loving this weather up here. You know, it's nothing like going outside and having your nose freeze. You know, it's such an experience. You don't have to have a snow cone. You just suck the snot back in. And
you should have saw Chris's face when I told him what our weather was today.
Yeah.
74 degrees here in sunny Southern California. I was out sitting in the sun, dude.
I was sitting behind the snowblower when I slipped and fell on my fat ass trying to snowblow the driveway. So I'm so happy for you, but this weather in Buffalo, I always say this, and I don't mean anything bad about the people of Buffalo. They're really great, but the weather is like Satan took a dump here.
Hey, by the way, isn't your esteemed Governor Kathy Hochul from Buffalo?
Don't say that. You know, I just said the people were great here, and you just took it down about 20 notches.
Well, I'm just asking, you know.
There's a big sign somewhere out on the road that says, "You're not welcome." What can I tell you? Also with us, I call him the Padre. His real name is Dan Carlson, but he's a great guy. We call him the Padre because he's up on the pulpit giving you the real deal of spirituality. Dan, how are you?
Well, I'm thawing out here. While the silverback was sunning his hide on the beach, I was jump-starting my mother-in-law's car. We had 25 below zero this morning.
Oh, right, that's even worse than Buffalo.
Yeah, we had a high temperature of 10. But hey,
wow.
60s are on the way for the weekend. That is the
Jim Shore weather, 10 degrees.
Yeah. Black Hills, you look it up, Spearfish, South Dakota, the world record fastest temperature change. It can literally go from sub-freezing to 50s or 60s in about 2 or 3 minutes when those Chinook winds could kick in. And
that is
tomorrow, I'm hoping it's going to be warm enough so in the afternoon I can do some ice fishing.
All right. Ice fishing?
Yeah.
Why would you want to cut a hole in the ice, sit out in your freezing cold to catch a minnow? Well, I can't figure that one out.
The temperature is supposed to be in the 40s tomorrow. I'll be very comfortable out there sitting on my bucket, drowning some waxworms.
Hey, let me ask you a question. Do people go fall through the ice? Any of them, like, you know, they cut that big thing with a chainsaw and I'm just wondering if anybody's ever slipped in the ice or fell in or something.
Not that I've seen. Most of the guys around here use electric or gas-powered augers. Mine is manual, so I just manually turn this giant auger and power through about a foot of ice to get down in there. And then
what do you fish for?
The lake where I usually fish, it's got just about everything. It's got some bass, it's got some bluegills, it's got nice sized perch, it's got crappies, it's got northern pike, it's got catfish, and occasionally a very large snapping turtle.
Yeah, I actually went to fishing the other day. I went to Wegmans and got a beautiful salmon. So, you know, right there, it was packaged, it was cleaned, it was all. I couldn't go for that. All right, well, listen. I actually made a mistake last week, and I want to correct myself. Don was not here. And as people know, I am one of the 5 people in the United States that are redacting Leonard Stringfield's diaries. Now, why do we have to redact them? Because there's some stuff in there that we don't, and it's all we're redacting are people's names, but there's some names in there that these people are still alive, and there's some really weird stuff in there, so we have to redact them. But that being said, we found Don Eckert in Leonard Stringfield's diary. So I actually made, and I think I still have it. Let me put it up there. There it is. So in the Stringfield diary, Don Eckert was, and I said this last week, Don Eckert was one of the 5 people that were trusted. Now, that's a big thing in ufology because, as we know, there's a lot of charlatans out there, a lot of scammers, a lot of people out there that are just giving wild and cockamamie stories. But Don, in that capacity, was one of the 5 people that were trusted, and Leonard Stringfield agreed. However, that did not come from Leonard Stringfield, so I wanted to say that. But Don, I want you to explain to the audience, because it was a fascinating story you told me about, that came from Bill Cooper, right?
Boy, I'll tell you what, we have a guest tonight, and if I would start telling that story, it would go for a very long time. I don't want to take away from the guest.
Can you give us just a Reader's Digest version?
Yeah. Bill Cooper was a guy that first surfaced in July of 1988. Okay. He surfaced on the Paranet BBS system. Now, Paranet was a computer bulletin board system that literally ended up spanning the globe. It went from all across the United States to Britain, to Great Britain, to Ireland, to France, to Germany, to Russia, okay, to Japan, to Australia. And it was under one umbrella roof, begun by a guy by the name of Jim Spicer. It was literally, okay, now listen to this, literally the petri dish that UFOs on the internet first began. Now, with that being said, a guy, Spicer, also was on CompuServe. He was a forum administrator on the old CompuServe system in a place called the Issues Forum. And when I got my first computer in 87, okay, and I ended up putting a modem on it, which in those days, that was an add-on, okay. I was looking for something to do other than BBSs, and CompuServe was a place I ended up at. It's pay as you go. If you had a 300 baud modem, okay, which is what I had, you could literally count the pixels as a sentence or a document began to form. Now, a guy by the name of Cooper also was on CompuServe. He saw what Spicer was doing, and he sent a document to Spicer that initially lit up a lot of stuff. And this document stated that around 1966, Cooper was a crew member on board a diesel submarine, a U.S. naval diesel submarine called the USS Tyroot. And while he was on a lookout outside in the sail of the submarine, this gigantic, huge UFO came out of the ocean, flew up into the clouds, a little bit later came back and went down underneath. That was the extent of the story. Now, I was already a member of Paranet, and I ended up getting in touch with this guy, and he, a little bit later, asked me if I would forward a document he was going to send to me to Stanton Friedman. Well, I kind of thought that was a little odd, but I said, yeah, sure, which I ended up doing. Now, a bit later, and we're talking months and what have you, this guy's story grew geometrically by leaps and bounds. And over all the years that I've been involved in the UFO field, I've seen this happen with a number of people. And I've always believed, I like Chris, had been a police officer and a criminal investigator. And I saw this happen with others, that in order to stay relevant, you had to keep relevant. And basically you did that by increasing the scope and narrative of your story, whether it was real or not. Well, to make a long story short, it must have been around this time when Cooper claimed that I was one of the few people that was trustworthy, because not too long afterwards, I ended up doing, in the pages of UFO magazine, where I was the director of research, I ended up doing several exposés on this guy. And he went absolutely apoplectic. But hey, look, that's fodder for another broadcast. But to make a long story short, Chris, that's the Reader's Digest version.
Well, he must have saw some greatness in you, and so did Leonard Stringfield, because you were in the diaries. And I got to tell you, I agree with them. So anyways, now that that's been taken care of, let's get on to our guest. And let me explain something about her. Our guest is a scientist. She's been around for a long time. Oh, man, I shouldn't have said that, because she's not that old. Anyways, she's been around, and she's a great ufologist, probably one of the best in the United States. She does an unbelievable job. She has written so many books on ufology, ghosts, spirits, and I consider her an expert because I've talked to her several times. She just lays it out there what actually happens, and she's done a phenomenal job about investigating this stuff in the Hudson Valley area. She's also turned her attention to animal reactions to UFOs, and I didn't know that, but there's been a lot of animals that have been damaged, killed by extraterrestrials and stuff, and I found that absolutely amazing. So I'd like to introduce to all you here, Linda Zimmerman. Hello, Linda. How are you?
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much.
Well, don't bash me on the head when I said you've been around for a long time. I didn't mean
I have.
and stuff.
I'm not that young, so.
Well, the first question I have for you, because we're going to do a round table here, because everybody wants to beat up on you a little bit. So, what I want to do is I want to start out. How did you get into ufology? I've never heard you explain how you got to this subject. I knew you were a scientist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you major in to become a scientist, and then go into how you became a ufologist?
Yeah, I majored in the sciences in college, and while working my way through college, I got a job at a medical diagnostics company where we made test kits and controls and calibrators. Like when you go to the lab to get your blood tested, we're the ones who made all the chemicals and test kits and controls for it. So yeah, I was a science nerd. And after about 10 years, the company closed its research and development division, which is what I was in. And I had always wanted to write. So I started writing about history and science, and I dabbled in the paranormal, and it seemed that whatever I was speaking about in the Hudson Valley, whether it was the paranormal or local history, the Civil War, you name it, so many people would come up to me after the lecture and start telling their UFO story. And be, why are you telling me these? They said, we like the way you handle material and tell a story and document things, and you should work on UFOs. And it took quite a number of years. And finally I said, okay, I grew up here, I had a sighting, but I had no idea of the scope and the depth of the number of witnesses here. So I realized this was probably one of the most important areas in all of the country in terms of UFOs. So it was just the preponderance of evidence, should we say, that all of these people kept coming to me and sharing their story. And then once I started writing and lecturing about it, that encouraged another wave of people. I just had someone a week ago who had sightings in the Hudson Valley going back to the blackout of 1965.
Wow.
And he had sightings during the big wave in the 80s. And these were unpublished sightings. He had told a few people throughout his life. So it's amazing to still get witnesses coming forward for the first time with 40, 50, 60-year-old sightings.
That's something. Now, what was the first book you actually written to start your ufology author? Because you've written so many books, and I'm fascinated by the last book that you wrote about animal reactions to UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
But what was the first book?
Yeah, the first book was called In the Night Sky, and it was accompanied by a film. As I was doing the research, a production company was following me around filming it. So we actually brought the film to the UFO Congress, I think in 2012 or 2013, and it won the People's Choice Award, which was, really nice. So you can read these people's in-depth stories, and then you can watch the film and see them speak on the locations of where they had their sightings. So that book you just put up, that is a compilation of my first 3 UFO books with, yes, that I realized I can't have 3, 4, 5 individual volumes. It needed to all be together. So if you wanted to see about all the cylinder sightings in the Hudson Valley, all the abductions, all the triangles, it's in this one really big, heavy book. So it encompasses 100 years of UFO sightings in this area.
Now, you see, that's one of the most fascinating things that I'm looking at the Hudson Valley area. I mean, there's been so many sightings out there, and I think everybody here, we all are wondering about the abduction phenomenon, and you've done an amazing job with the abduction phenomenon. You've turned around and actually worked with abductees for so. Can you tell us a little bit about the abduction phenomenon that's going on in the Hudson Valley?
When I first started really going in depth into research, I assumed most of the stories would be, saw a distant light, I saw a shape. And no, the very first filming we did for the book, this man, Gary, came to my house, and right off the bat, it was lifelong abductions from the time he was a little child, seeing small creatures would come in his bedroom, all the way up several times, all the way up to missing time experiences when he was an adult, some very dramatic ones. And turns out his children were having experiences. His parents had experiences going back to the 1930s.
Oh my God.
So welcome to the UFO field in the Hudson Valley, multi-generational abductions going back to the 30s. And that was my first big case for the book and the film.
Wasn't he ill for a while? Didn't he get ill?
Yeah, he's had health issues. After the one abduction, he became violently ill. and almost like heavy flu-like symptoms. Took him days to get over that. And I've seen that a lot where people, it takes it out of you a lot of the time, and you become very sick. And there's unfortunately quite a few people who have had really close experiences, have had cancer as well. So
Brain injuries, traumatic brain injury of some sort too?
not that I've been able to document, but certainly a laundry list of physical ailments and physical marks as well, scoop marks and things like that.
Because we know Gary Nolan is investigating the physical injuries. I think Kit Green is doing the same thing. Physical injuries of abductees that they've come back with. Some of the symptoms are like Havana syndrome, where they have white spots on the brain and stuff after communicating or an encounter with either a craft or an actual extraterrestrial. So I want to ask Don. Don, you've been in this business longer than anybody I know, and you've got a great handle on ufology. But the abduction experience, what's your take on what Linda is saying?
Well, let me say up front that I have two questions for Linda, but I'll be happy to entertain that query. Linda, by the way, it's a great pleasure to have you on UAP Crossfire. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, going back to when my wife Vicki and I were publishing UFO magazine, I made it a firm stance for myself personally, okay, to not deal with anybody having claimed abductions. And I had a reason for that, kind of like a physician's reason. First, do no harm to the person. I was a cop long enough, and I saw a lot of stuff. I was always terrified of telling somebody something that would end up harming them. Now, we had a lot of people, and believe me when I tell you this, a lot of people, and we knew very well, we knew Bud Hopkins, we knew David Jacobs. There was a gal out here, and she's still, from what I believe, somewhat active in hypnotherapy. All right. She started it back then, a woman by the name of Yvonne Smith. And I got to say, now, just in the course of doing the magazine, Vicki and I went to a number of places where they were doing hypnotherapy. One of the things that terrified me. Now, let me say this first. Law enforcement, in rare cases, have utilized hypnotherapy with a very qualified hypnotherapy expert. I mean, we're not talking about the run-of-the-mill Dick and Jane hypnotherapist. These were people recognized by the court systems. But as I said, very rarely. And I'll never forget, Vicki and I went to one hypnotherapy session. And the person here in California was somewhat well known in the abduction circles. And I'm not going to mention any names. But during the session, I watched the hypnotherapist ask this subject, well, where did the aliens come from? Now, if you know anything about hypnotherapy, if you know especially anything about law enforcement, that is a leading question. And depending upon the depth of hypnosis somebody is in, they will subconsciously wish to please the questioner. And I got to say, when I observed that, I turned to my wife and I said, I think it's time we go, because I considered that to be a complete washout. So I would tell anybody that ever came to me asking for advice, and I was ironclad on this, first thing I would tell them is, look, I am not qualified to comment on your experience. So this is what I would suggest. And this is only a suggestion. Number one, if this experience is not interfering with your life, try to put it behind you. If it is, all right, and you're deeply troubled by it, this is what I recommend. Do you have any physical effects? If so, especially, first, I would schedule an appointment with my family doctor and go in and have a private conversation and see what that reaction would be. If he's not able or willing to do anything to help you, the next thing I would suggest, and this is no reflection on you, see a mental health counselor. Preferably one, if you can find them, that may have dealt with something like this. The last thing in the world I would ever suggest would be to go to somebody that specializes in hypnotherapy and UFO abduction groups. That's how I acted and reacted on it. I was afraid of telling them something that could come back and end up being harmful to them. So, Chris, did that answer your question?
Answer my question. What were the two questions that you had for Linda?
Okay. Now, Linda, these are two questions, and the last few years I've become increasingly interested in cryptozoology. Okay. Now, going back to when I was a kid, all right, the idea of Sasquatch, the abominable snowman, Bigfoot. I mean, I had heard all kinds of things about this. And if I recollect correctly, okay, even people like Frank Edwards wrote about this. Now, if you don't know who he is, oh, you do?
Yes.
Okay.
I read his books when I was young. Absolutely.
Very good. Okay. So with that being said, I've never doubted that there is something like a Sasquatch type creature out there, a humanoid creature, by all accounts, very large, extremely strong, and very shy, usually very shy. But that's not all that's been reported being out there. And my first question deals with, have you come across any cases or stories where witnesses have described a canine-headed type bipedal creature, commonly called dogmen? Now, up in your part of New York, I would think that that might be a prime area for reports of something like that.
Certainly, there's been Sasquatch, even some little Pukwudgie sightings, the small little creatures. Dogman sightings are very rare in this area. However, about 20 minutes from where I live, there was some guys who were camping, saw some lights in the woods, possible UFO, just lights, and then supposedly encountered 3 or 4 dogman creatures. There are a couple of others further upstate, but dogman is one of the rarest of sightings of cryptids in the Hudson Valley.
Were
I
they
think.
aggressive or threatening?
Yes, they were very aggressive, and they ran to their car and took off. And one was standing in the road as if to block them, and they had to go around it. And a friend of mine who, the lifelong abductee I was just mentioning, Gary, he is dogman obsessed. And anytime there's any sort of dogman sighting in this area, he lets me know about it. In fact, we may be planning going down south. He wants to do some dogman hunting. Wait, not with a gun, dogman searching. So I said, hey, I'm game. But yes,
you are going to take a shotgun with you or something, right?
I'll bring something.
Yeah,
Not that it has any good.
I was going to say I would not go out there and not have a means to protect myself.
Mhm.
Okay.
Silver bullets. Silver
Now
bullets.
yeah, silver bullets. Now, this next question, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't know if it will. And
But you will.
If it does, I didn't mean it personally. But, you know, I've been in this racket for a long time. And I've been a broadcaster starting in 1991. And over all those years, I have interviewed, well, until recent years, in some quarters, I'm considered persona non grata. So be that as it may. But in recent years, I've interviewed them all. I've interviewed people like Bud Hopkins, Dave Jacobs, Colonel Gordon Cooper. I've interviewed Stanton Friedman, Linda Moulton Howe. I mean, you name across the spectrum. Now, in the mid to latter 80s, I got a copy when it came out of the Hudson Valley UFO case, written by Bob Pratt, J. Allen Hynek, and Philip Imbrogno. Now, when my wife and I were doing the magazine, we had periodic contact with Imbrogno. And I'll never forget, and as a matter of fact, I wrote about it. I considered him an extremely legitimate researcher, where he claimed that after the UFO circumstances and happenings in the Hudson Valley, that the Indian Point nuclear power plant even had, according to him, alleged UFO encounters, including entities. All right. Now, like I said, my contact with Phil was not frequent or often, unless I heard from him or something came up where his name popped into the mix. And in the latter part of the last decade, I began my current radio show. It was on a different network called Dark Matters Radio. And at that time, Imbrogno and his co-writer then, Mary Ellen Guiley, all right, had a number of books that they were collaborating on. And Imbrogno came on my show talking about a number of things. Not the least was what he called his dream team back in the 70s and his current research on Islamic jinn, the demons of the Islamic world, the fire creatures, the plasmoid creatures, whatever the hell they're called. So one day, okay, I get a note from a guy I know, and he said, hey, Don, I know that you've recently interviewed Phil Imbrogno on his claims about Islamic jinn. And I said, yeah. He said, are you familiar with he's claiming to be from a PhD from MIT. And he, of course, at the time was a high school science teacher. And I said, well, I've seen some mention of that. This guy was a skeptic. All right. Now, the very last time Imbrogno was on my radio show, he made a remark that resonated with me. And, you know, hey, I was pretty much a one-man band. And I didn't have time, or the time I wanted, to follow up on a lot of things. But he had stated he was in MACV SOG in Vietnam. Now, I'll tell you what that is if you don't know. MACV SOG stood for Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observation Group. Now, what this actually was an extraordinarily high-level black operation with American Special Forces troops like Delta today that went on, for the most part, unsanctioned missions into Laos and Cambodia. A very exclusive club. These guys all know each other, all knew each other, okay? The ones that died over there, that never came home, the bodies they brought home, and the survivors today. Very close-knit, exclusive little group. Now, when I was in Vietnam, I was involved in intelligence operations, okay? And like I said, when I heard that, I kind of wrinkled my brow, and I thought, well, maybe at some point I'll follow up on that. Well, the bottom line was I didn't until later. And this guy that sent me the note, I got in touch with him, and I said, well, what's your point? What is it you're doing? He said, well, I'm contacting MIT to see if the guy has a PhD. I said, okay, well, let me know what you find out. Well, he did. He sent me the document MIT sent back to him saying they had no record of this guy, none. Nobody with a similar name, nothing. Well, that gave me the impetus I needed to start my own little research project. Here was a guy on my radio show that was telling my audience and me, all right, that he was one of America's most elite warriors that was in an organization that most won't even talk about today, and the freaking war was 50 years ago. Okay. So I started making my contacts in the Special Forces community. And I got a hold of this guy through another veteran buddy. And guy, I'm in a veterans organization called the Military Order of the Purple Heart. It's strictly for combat wounded vets. And this guy had been a platoon recon leader that put me in touch with this retired major. So I got in touch with him and I laid out this story. And I said, here was a guy that claimed he was MACV-SOG. Let me know if you can find any record of him. Well, to make a long story short, nothing. Then I thought, well, damn it, Ecker, you were an investigator. Do a little research on Phil yourself. So I did. And I found out he was born in 1951. Now, in order to even go in to Special Forces, the Green Beret, you had to be at least 21 years of age. You had to be a triple volunteer. You had to volunteer for the Army, not draft, volunteer. You had to volunteer for jump school to become a paratrooper. and you had to volunteer for SF. Now, I got back and I got this, and this skeptic guy was ready to release his findings. So I called Phil up and I said, Phil, I said, look, this is what's going on. I'm not the kind of guy that'll ambush you. Okay, I'll let you know right up front. This guy found out you don't have a PhD. He's going to release that. And I am currently checking your claims of being in special forces. And by the way, Phil, you were too damn young. Well, he just shut it off. He broke up with Mary Ellen Guiley, or she broke up with him. I don't mean in a romantic way. I'm talking about their writing partnership. And he basically went underground for a while. Now, in recent years, I have seen him pop up a few times. But Linda, I know you had to know him. What's your take on all of this?
You have said it, not to be trusted. I know someone who had him as a teacher in school and said it was widely known he made things up. So it is very unfortunate for the Hudson Valley history that he was so involved in it. He did interview witnesses. He did do some good work, but I personally and every other legitimate researcher I know will not have anything to do with him.
I suspected that, but I certainly didn't want to put any words in your mouth.
Yeah, and I knew Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and before she died, she told me one of her greatest regrets was getting fooled by him and that book, and she also would not have anything else to do with him. So it's the whole thing. It's a black eye in ufology, and particularly for the Hudson Valley.
Well, thank you for being so damn stand-up-ish. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for surviving that interrogation by Dot.
No,
the only thing
glad
he didn't do is he didn't put the bright lights on you.
I'm so glad you did the research, because as Chris and I know, there are some people who could use the scrutiny in this field and just get away with things that make us angry.
Yeah, there's a lot of charlatans out there that they steal people's work and they claim they are something. Anyways, Padre.
Hi.
Let's go back to abductions.
Well,
and because you take a different spin on this, and it's interesting to see how you're going to talk to Linda about abductions.
Well, being a pastor and very into the spiritual aspect of UAP and aliens, or whatever they are, interdimensional beings, I am not dismissive of people who claim to have had abduction experiences. There are various approaches to that. I don't doubt for a moment that they are experiencing what they say they have seen. But I have 2 whole pages of typed questions for Linda here.
There she is.
How long do we have tonight?
I would like to ask about a couple of the abduction cases in your books. In the Hudson Valley UFOs startling eyewitness accounts from 1909 to the present, you talked about some incidents that took place involving abductions around Pine Bush. And I'm wondering if you could share with us some of the details of that, and what was it about this particular instance that stood out to you?
Well, Pine Bush itself is one of the hottest of hotspots in the Hudson Valley, particularly in the 1990s. And I don't know which case in particular you're referencing, because there were so many cases of missing time. Do you have any more specifics?
Well, there was one sighting, I believe, here that talked about a woman who reported to seeing small humanoid figures near a landed craft in Pine Bush in the late 1980s. And they were described typically as one would describe a gray alien, small, large heads, black eyes, and so forth. And what I was wondering about is, do you see a specific type of alien involved in these abduction cases around Pine Bush, or are there varied entities?
There are varied, but predominantly what we would call the grays have been involved. Some taller beings, a couple of reptile, praying mantis type, but mostly the grays. But what I found was almost all the people I spoke to did not undergo hypnotherapy. These were just conscious recollections. They see a craft, they may see a figure, and the next thing they know, an hour, 2 hours or something have passed. They have physical repercussions as a result. They do not remember what went on during that time. So there are numerous cases where they'll see a craft really low, and the next thing they know, wait a minute, what happened to those 3 hours? That maybe they blacked out, but it sounds like possibly an abduction that they have no recollection of. So there are these cases where they never even see any type of creature during
they have
the
missing
event.
time, you say?
Missing time.
Interesting.
And then, yes, and then we'll have bloody noses is common, scoop marks, feeling ill, onset of phobias, these different fears of being examined, of going to the doctor, of being out alone. So there's all these different things. Everybody's different, but there are these similarities. When you look at a few hundred cases, you see these similarities. But I'm trying to think of someone who told me that they saw themselves being brought aboard a craft and this experiment went on. If there's a conscious case of abduction, I can't recall it at this point.
You mentioned in another of your books, More Hudson Valley UFOs, an instance where some people were traveling along and there was a triangular craft blocking the road. And different kinds of beings were associated with that craft. These were, I think, taller, more slender. And have you been able to correlate the type of entity with the kind of craft? So are these tall, skinny ones more with the triangles, or what are you finding?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I can't think that only the tall ones are in this type of craft, or only the, shorter ones. Yeah, that's a good question. And I could make something up, but I honestly don't know.
Okay. Well, one more. I minored in physical geography, so topography and the lay of the land is something that always fascinates me. And when I look at satellite pictures, like I did earlier today, of the Hudson Valley, what I'm seeing is a lot of uneven terrain, a lot of heavily forested areas. And of course, you have the river going through that. When we're looking at a place like that, I'm saying to myself, this doesn't look like a nice place to land. I'm sure there are open fields here and there, but are people reporting, are these things coming to the forests? Are they coming out of the river? Are there some USOs there? Or what is it about the topography and the lay of that land that seems to draw them to that area?
Yeah, lots and lots of water. And you've probably saw, in addition to the river, there are a lot of lakes, big and small, reservoirs. And yes, numerous cases of craft coming out of the water, going into the water, being seen, their lights moving under the water. So that is a huge component here. And yes, we have so much woods and a lot of places for things to hide. But landings, very, very rare. In fact, going back to the 1909 sightings of the mysterious airship, someone wrote, we have no idea from whence they come or where they go. They don't seem to take off, and we never see them land. And yeah, and you could say that really throughout the last 100 years.
We have someone in our chat, Kathleen, who points out the mountainous areas. When I see mountains, of course, I start thinking of caves. Has there been any association of the alien entities or the UAPs in or moving around caved areas?
Yes, there's an area called the Magnetic Mine Road. There used to be a lot of magnetite mines in a certain area of Putnam County, which seemed to draw an enormous amount of activity, and some large caves or holes or whatever were left that some activity was seen. There's some caves in some people pronounce it Shawangunk. It's apparently Shwangung Mountains to the west of Pine Bush. There are some caves. Well, actually, craft are seen looking like they're coming out of the mountain or going into the mountain as well. So whether that's a perspective and there's a cave, or they're doing some sort of transmedium, air to rock, I don't know. But yes, certainly that is a possibility.
Well, that's very interesting because in Mr. Coulthard's interview with Mr. Baker about the recovery of that egg-shaped UFO that we saw the video of, Mr. Baker commented that he had seen UAPs coming out of mountains, and I believe some of the researchers at Skinwalker Ranch have also reported that kind of phenomenon.
Yes, I heard that in Coulthard's interview. My ears perked up when he said that. So,
is there anything about this area that you can think of geographically? Mineral deposits, some kind of a resource that would be particularly attractive or seem to draw this kind of activity?
As I mentioned, the magnetite, we're on a fault line. And, there's different energies, natural earth energies involved with that. I don't know if you're familiar with the gravitational field map. Someone charted, which one area that caught my attention on that map was Yorktown Heights was one of the epicenters of the wave of the 80s. And if you look at the gravitational map for that area, it's basically a circle of an anomalous, or at least a different gravitational field around that area. I suspect that there are natural earth energies that may be a little stronger. And, all you need is a difference to be able to use that as an energy, a difference in temperature, a difference in magnetic field, gravitational field. And if you have the technology, you can exploit that. And I think there's something about this area that they can utilize in their propulsion or something else. And just the plain fact that I've spoken extensively on UFOs sucking water out of rivers, lakes, and many pools being drained. People see a UFO over their pool. The next day it's empty, and they'll assume there was a leak. They'll fill it back up, and the water stays. And that's actually a worldwide phenomena. Pools and water tanks being drained by UFOs.
When that happens, is there a physical connection, a hose to the craft, or how is the water extracted?
I recall one woman said it looked like a large hose going into the reservoir, but for the most people that have told me, they see a light, something beaming down, and then the water just being sucked up into the bottom of the craft.
Do you think they use that for energy, Linda? You think that could be fuel? Because I mean, if you can extract the hydrogen from it.
Sure. Yeah. Who knows what cooling things, drinking? I don't know. Just it's not like they're taking water samples where you need a cup or two. I mean, these are hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water being taken.
Didn't also a pile of sand get taken? There was something in the driveway.
Yes, you have a very good memory.
Well, I'm
there
losing
was
it, but
this was in Monroe, New York, which is about 15 minutes from me. A woman had a couple of large dogs, very protective, and in the middle of the night they're going ballistic, and all of a sudden two what she described as like Mack truck headlights are beaming through her bedroom window.
Then I'm going to stop you right there because
sure.
we got to go to break, but we're going to continue that story right after break.
Folks,
don't go away. Linda Zimmerman's our guest. We're going to be talking all kinds of things. We're going to break.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
We are back after that commercial there. We're here with Don Eckert, Dan the Padre Carlson, and our guest tonight is Linda Zimmerman, telling us all about the Hudson Valley. And we were talking about water being sucked up from pools. I have never heard that before. I think that's awful fascinating. But I remember an investigation you did where they sucked up some sand. I mean, there was a pile of sand or dirt or something in the highway, and they left sort of like a calling card.
Yes. Well, when last we left our witness, she was in bed, and she described her dog's animal reactions are going crazy. She's thinking someone's breaking in. Her husband won't wake up, and she said it looked like two Mack truck headlights beaming in her bedroom window. The only problem is she was on the second floor. So that's yeah. And she said she should have been terrified because they were a little remote, and she worried about break-ins. And instead of calling the police or whatever, she said, "Oh, it's okay. I'll just check in the morning," and went to sleep. It was like, some sort of influence just put her out. Next thing she knows, it's morning, and she finally gets her husband awake, and he was a science teacher. And she's saying the dogs were going nuts, and there was these lights, and blah, 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 and he's like, yeah, okay. Oh, let me go outside and see what the big bad UFO did. And about 5 minutes later, he runs in, call the state police, call the sheriff, call everybody. She's like, well, what's going on? Well, they had a pile of sand. They were doing some construction. So they had a truckload of sand delivered to make concrete. It was gone. It was there when they went to bed. It was gone. And there was, I believe, as I recall, about an 18-foot diameter markings, a circular, that what little sand was left, it had pressed and fused it into the blacktop. So it was heavy and it was hot. And it
damn ET thieves.
Really? So
might have used it for kitty litter. You never know.
I don't know what they used. At first I thought it had just been blown away, but you couldn't see it. Fortunately, they had the presence of mind to take a series of Polaroid pictures. This was back in the 80s. There's no sand to be seen anywhere. It's if it pulled it up and sat in their driveway. As I said, it was hot and it was heavy. And they had, I interviewed her 20, 30 years later, and I said, is it still there? Are these rings still there? She said, well, they are, but we've paved, when you get your driveway redone. But she had given me permission to have a team come by and take core samples or remove that section. And I could never get anybody who was willing to do that. They've since moved, new owners, but I am more than willing, if we ever get a team who's willing to cut up a driveway to examine it, I'll knock on the door and say, look.
I don't think it's the problem of cutting up the driveway. I think the problem trying to repair it.
Well, yes, there's that too. So perhaps that's why people were reluctant. But there's evidence sitting there under the pavement. I would love, I'm sure people who know blacktop and calculations can figure out how heavy this had to be and how hot it had to be to melt sand into blacktop.
Was there any fragments of glass with that? Because doesn't sand at hot temperatures
fusing? Yeah, I don't know if it was hot enough to melt the sand into glass, but it certainly melted it into the blacktop.
Gotcha. Don, you've done every type of UFO investigation there is. I know we've seen water.
Well, I don't know about that, but
well, have these little creatures been stealing sand all over the place, or what?
I got to tell you, this
little
is
bastards.
First time I ever heard of it. Now the water, oh yeah. I've heard actually a number of different cases. As a matter of fact, Dingo Swan told me that. Have you read his book Penetration? He recounts in his book about the guy calling himself Mr. Axelrod. By the way, do you know who Ingo Swan was, Linda?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or,
Was the guy that designed the protocols for the Stargate program that took him up to Alaska to see a UFO, which materialized over a lake, according to what he personally told me and what's in his book. And it also took water. But all of this was preceded by this UFO shooting the place up with energy beams. The first thing that happened. So yeah, this is something that's been associated with
Can you
with the
can you
UFO
describe
field.
what you're talking? Because I'm fascinated by that, Don, about shooting the energy beams.
Okay. According to what Swan said, Axelrod and his two, I'm just going to call them henchmen, all right, who Swan had dealings with ever since his covert remote viewing session on the moon, where he allegedly observed what could only be described as an extraterrestrial base on the far side of the moon. All right. These people had knowledge. As a matter of fact, at one point, he was out here in the mid 2000s, the first decade, and my wife and I, and he and another associate, had dinner in Burbank at this little Italian restaurant. We had about a 5-hour meal where we talked about all kinds of things. And he at one point even speculated that this Axelrod, if he was not CIA, NSA, MI6, Mossad, NKVD, whatever, okay? He didn't know who this guy was, but then he thought, my God, maybe he's actually an ET. And I asked him, I said, are you serious? He said, I didn't know. He said, my God, I just didn't know. But this guy had knowledge that he shouldn't have been able to have. Well, they warned Swan when they got to this spot. They were lying in a depression in the ground back from the lake. And this guy calling himself Axelrod, told Swan, he said, whatever you do, don't move. They detect motion like mad. And when this thing materialized, all right, out of a black cloud formed, and then this thing materialized into its shape like a black arrowhead. And suddenly, all around the lake, this thing began firing this weapon. I mean, there were animals in there. There were deer. God, I don't know, raccoons, bunny rabbits probably, but stuff that moved. And it just shot the place up. And they had to, the two henchmen with Axelrod literally grabbed Swan, yanked him out of that depression, and got down behind a tree with a deeper depression and threw him in there. And as a result, he injured his leg. He talked about that very distinctly. He had a wound on his leg as a result of that. But this thing, I guess, was making sure nobody was there to observe it. And that's what it did, according to him.
Unbelievable. So
we have a question from somebody.
Yeah, I was going to say, Padre.
One of our people in chat, Kathleen, says that she knows you, Linda, and that she related a story to you about the UFO that was over her house at Cornwall, New York. Do you remember that?
One of my favorite cases, one of the most remarkable. She could tell it best, but it was a summer. Cornwall's a typical small suburban town, and there was a UFO seen throughout a neighborhood, and directly over the house, so low it seemed like it was going to, crush the house. And about I'll throw out a number, about 90% of the witnesses saw a circular craft with lights all around it. She did a great sketch for me, but people standing right next, to those witnesses saw this craft as a black triangle with a single light in each corner. And it's just stunning. It calls into question the nature of the perception of these craft. Was it truly a triangle? Was it truly a circular craft? Was it something completely different? How did these people's minds perceive it and I've spoken to Kathleen, and I've spoken to a friend of hers who saw it as a triangle. All very credible. It's a great story. The police were contacted about this sighting. There were many, many, many witnesses. How does that happen? There's another case from Pine Bush where a lot of things in Pine Bush come in and out of the ground. And one man saw what he described as a Ferris wheel on fire rising up and spinning out of the ground. And the man right next to him described it as a glowing, like a 2x4. Well, there's a lot of difference between what a 2x4 and a flaming Ferris wheel look like. So what is going on in these cases? I'm sure you've probably heard of witnesses who see totally different things. So this Cornwall case is one of the best.
You wrote about, if I'm not mistaken, a sighting that took place in northern New Jersey in 1962 that appeared in a neighborhood that was an absolutely massive cylinder. Did you not? It was from a Blue Book report that you were referencing in researching that. Do you remember that?
I do not remember the details of it, but
Hawthorne, New Jersey.
Oh, Hawthorne, yes.
Okay.
Many police officers saw it. It was one of these sightings where everybody in the area, police departments were contacting other police departments. Are you seeing this? And how do you explain this? It was, you had many reliable witnesses, police officers who are trained to observe. And if that's the case I'm thinking of, there was, I believe, some sort of strange footprints somebody saw, and people, it starts going into the weeds a little, but certainly a lot was happening that night with that case.
In my notes here, it says that the cylinder split into two different parts and divided in front of everybody, and then moved around independently, and then came back together before zipping off at amazing speed. But the witnesses describe it as 100 feet long. Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah. During the wave of the 1980s, most witnesses said it was the size of a football field. So we're talking 300 feet. And there were, I remember this one woman, she was a reference librarian. She said, facts are my life. And she's waiting for her husband at the bus stop to come home. And she saw this enormous craft, triangular. And I said, well, was it the size of a football field? She's like, not really. And I'm like, what? I'm trying to get, well, what do you think it was the size of? I'm naming a house, a boat, this. And finally she said, it was the size of a football stadium.
Wow. Oh my God.
Wow.
How can you miss that?
Yes. And I was like, okay, then. And I had numerous witnesses tell me, I don't know if you know, Shea Stadium was the old Mets Stadium. I've had several witnesses tell me it was the size of Shea Stadium. So 100 feet in this area, that's nice, but
Small potatoes, right?
right.
Wow.
Yeah, right. Unbelievable. Padre, any other questions before I pivot a little bit?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask her here about the historical context of you have covered sightings going back more than 100 years. And in the 100 years of sightings that you've looked at, is there one that stands out to you as the most remarkable, most upsetting, most unusual, that just is different from all the others?
That is different. Well, am I allowed to use my own sighting? Because
Sure.
it is certainly the one that made the biggest impression on me, and the one that I would swear in a court of law for. And I was living in the town of Nanuet, New York at the time, and it's in the southern Rockland County. And a friend calls and said, Linda, go outside. There's something headed your way in the sky. And I'm 19 years old. I'm not researching UFOs at this point. I'm going to college, and there are I could not see a craft. All I could see were three balls of yellowish white lights, one in the front and two in the back. And they were just silently moving through the sky. We jump in the car, my boyfriend at the time and his friend. We're chasing this thing. And long story short, they break into three, so it wasn't a solid craft, because the one went east, one went south, one went north, and they were ready to give up. And Frank Edwards' book, I believe, Flying Saucers Serious Business, had a picture of a UFO someone took in, I believe, 1963, of a craft over Lake Tirati, which is in Harriman State Park, about 20 minutes from where we lived. And I don't know if that's why I thought, but they were there once, maybe they'd be there again. So we drive up there, and we're sitting by this lake, and sure enough, one comes back from the south, one comes back from the north, and one comes back from the east, and they're on a collision course. And we said, oh my God, they're going to crash. We really thought we were about to see something horrible. They come together. There's no noise. There's a flash of like bluish greenish light. And suddenly it's one solid, big, I don't want to use the word solid. All we saw was light. It's one greenish blue ball of light pulsing that slowly, it didn't crash, in a controlled manner, landed on the top of the hill there, overlooking the lake, and was just pulsing. So I wanted to run into the woods, despite the fact that I'm wearing a bathrobe and slippers. That's how fast we took after this. And I'm in a car with two guys, and I'm 19 years old. And at that moment, a state trooper pulls up. Oh, what's going on here? So I'm like, look, we followed this UFO, and he's probably thinking, we're drunk or high on top of it all. And I said, just turn around and look. And I don't even think, maybe a quarter of a mile from this hill with this pulsating green-blue light. And his expression he looked like he'd seen a ghost. And he said, get out of here now. He didn't want to deal with this. So we took off, and he blew by us. He couldn't have driven any faster. He wanted to get away from this thing. So I was studying physics at the time, and we didn't have that lesson in physics, how three objects come together and form a single object. And the motion, no signs of propulsion, no wings, no nothing, no sound. And we were so close to these objects. So not that I had real doubts before, but once that happened, this was back in 79, and it really made a deep impression on me. So something that to this day I talk about, and I still get goosebumps.
Wow.
Did you have any after effects, any like hitchhiker effect that they call it? Weird things, strangeness that happened after your sighting?
Well, to my great surprise, several years ago when I was working on these books, I said, I've written about all these other people's sightings. I should write about mine. And I was a scrupulous diary keeper. And I thought I knew. I was like, how do these people forget these things that happen, during their sightings? So I found the diary entry, and there was a whole section at another lake where we stood watching this craft zipping back and forth. And after I wrote that, I have no recollection of it after that. I also have the next day I wrote, we all went back and saw them again at Lake Tiarati. I have no conscious memory of that. And that really, really bothers me because you may have noticed, Chris, you probably know, I like my facts. I have a very good memory, but this episode is like a mural with the center cut out.
All right. So that being said, I'm going to
that could portend other things, Linda.
Yeah.
Yes, it could. And I'm not comfortable with that. Excuse me?
Do you think you're an abductee?
I think if I heard this story from another witness that I was interviewing, I would come to that conclusion.
Do you think there's a consciousness to all this?
Oh,
absolutely. Ben Rich talked about a consciousness when they were probing, because when he made an announcement, he was giving a lecture, and he was saying that we have the ability to take ET home. Everybody went nuts. And one of the people that I know actually cornered him and said, well, what are you talking about? How can we do that? And he turned around and he says, it's all about consciousness. Now we know, stuff is leaked out that they appear to, there's no controls to these ships that, people have said they've seen. It all has to do with kind of mind melting with the craft. So there's a possible consciousness. So I guess what I'm saying is, I remember you said one person said, hey, it was a square, it was a rectangle type shape. The other person said it was a triangle. I've had cases where people have, large group of people, like 7, 8, 9 people. 3 of them will see something in the sky and they keep pointing up there, but the other people say, we don't see anything. And, do you think there's a consciousness to this whole thing?
Yes, absolutely. In my diary I wrote after the initial sighting that night, I wrote, I knew they would be going to Lake Tiarati, so we went up there. Well, how the hell did I know that?
Yeah.
And I don't remember saying, I'm like, why did I write that? And so many people have told me they wish they could see a craft more closely, and it comes right at them. The man I told you just a week ago told me about his sightings. He was one of the people on Route 84 seeing this huge craft, and he said, for some reason I got the thought, if you can hear my thoughts, give me a sign. And suddenly the entire light configuration on the craft changed just like that. So there are just too many instances where there is a connection.
So that brings me to this. We're going to pivot a little bit now, and I want to get everybody's feeling about this. you have said, and I got a video of that there's a spirituality connected with this, that all these things that we're looking at are somehow all connected. Let me play this video and then I'll get your comments.
Is there ever any connections between like the UFOs and other kind of paranormal phenomenon?
Yes, and I fought that for years, but it seems, we go back to Pine Bush, it seems the biggest concentrations of UFO sightings, and you can stand in the middle of the main street and say, that place is haunted, and that place is haunted, and that place. So the weirdness seems to congregate in certain areas, and why the Hudson Valley in particular, I have no idea.
You got a little bit of that ending there. But anyways, is there a connection with the spirituality or all this paranormal with the UFO topic? Because some people say, no, it's all nuts and bolts, but yet other people say that it's not.
Yeah. As I said, when I first started, it was like, no, it's not all connected. And the more I did it, I'm like, okay, yes, it's all connected. I think, I don't know what the underlying cause is. Are you more open once you have an experience? Are you more open to experiencing the paranormal, cryptids, high strangeness of all kinds? And I'm not just talking about seeing a distant light in the sky. Right. I'm talking about something hovering over your head or you having missing time. And there's a shift, there's an expansion of consciousness, I believe, and you are just more open and in tune with all kinds of things that we would lump in paranormal, supernatural, whatever you want to call it. I think there is an absolute connection.
The reason I'm saying that is because, and I want the other two guys to chime in on this too, is because Jake Barber, over this, interview that was supposed to be the end all know all, in which I still are open to different ideas about it. He says that he was flooded with so much consciousness of joy and happiness and the feeling of euphoria that was sweeping over his body. Yet the people I've interviewed have been terrified out of their minds, and so I'm listening to this different scenario that this guy is getting of joy and happiness when everybody else is scared out of their wits. So, Don, with Jake Barber here and this different, do you believe there's a spirituality or consciousness to this thing?
Well, I believe that there is a spiritual, be it good, bad, indifferent, there's a component to it, yes. And I go back to when I first became professionally involved in the field. I was convinced, and a rock could have fell on my head, would not have changed my mind, that it was strictly a nuts and bolts thing. But as time went on, and as I was exposed to a lot of some very weird stuff, my thinking evolved. And I began looking seriously into the possibility of a interdimensional, from another universe, if you will, possible component. And that seemed it for a bit. But then one other concept entered my mind. And you guys know this, Chris, you know this, that I've been involved in prehistorical research going back to prior to the Younger Dryas event. I believe it's highly probable that at some point, humanity, Homo sapiens sapien, had reached a high technological level. Now, how high? I have no idea. None. But if, as we suspect, that these entities, the Anunnaki, if you will, okay, and I could go off on a tangent on that, got here roughly 450,000 years ago. There's no telling with their genetic tinkering that I believe happened what the possibilities may have been. And saying that if in fact human beings, at least some, had achieved high technological status when the Younger Dryas event happened, I suspect those that were able to evacuated the planet. And eventually, some of them came back, but they went underground. So in my worldview with this topic, we have three possibilities. We have the possibility of actual extraterrestrial from another star system beings coming here, the possibility of interdimensional entities, which by its very nature would seem to have some type of spiritual component. Some believe highly negative. And then the possibility of ancient human descendants that are still around. Hey, I've been told in 30 plus years by many, many people that they are here walking among us.
Look just like us.
Indistinguishable from anybody else. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Well, basically on that, Padre, spirituality and UFOs?
Well, understand, I am a Christian, and the Bible and my Christian faith inform my decisions. I'm also a scientist, background in meteorology for many, many years. So I tend to look at things through both lenses and try to come to some kind of a conclusion. In looking at all of this, I do agree with Don that there is a war going on between good and evil.
Oh, yeah.
And we are stuck in the middle. And we see manifestations of good and evil. And I think we can go back through history, however far back you want to go. And people have recorded these interactions, if you will, as being good or bad, depending upon the entities that they interact with. I do not think that they're interstellar, simply because when you look at the extremely complex nature of what that would involve, in time shifts, the incredible speeds, the fuel, the food, that you just so many variables attached to that. So I do favor an interdimensional answer to this, so long as within that interdimensional we can include what people have reported as angels or demons. And I think that if you look at the Christian faith, we have a history of interactions with beings from another dimension. We call them demons or angels. And my concern is, we believe that there is a malevolent entity in command of the forces of evil, the devil, known as Satan, Beelzebub, other names. And his objective is to distract us and steer us away from faith in God, faith in Jesus Christ. And anything that he can do to distract us, he doesn't care if we worship him, just don't worship God. And so I think that what we have is this battleground. We're stuck in the middle, but these things that come into people's rooms at night and terrorize them and do these terrible things to them, that's not angel behavior. That's more like demonic behavior. And I do know from personal experience and counseling with people, interacting with people, that if you have at some point in your life opened a door, a spiritual door to the evil, it has a way of sticking a hook in you and coming back through your life at various,
like an Ouija board.
I'm sorry,
like an Ouija board.
Yes, yeah. Some people, Ouija boards. I mean, you talk to people even who aren't Christians, but who are spiritualists. They'll tell you, stay away from that. Don't mess with those forces, because you're opening a door and something can attach itself to you. There's a hitchhiker effect for some people who've interacted with these interdimensional beings, and I don't think that's coincidental. But I do know this. I do know that there are over 300 instances where people have been in the middle of an abduction scenario, and they have said, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave me alone, and the entities depart. There's got to be something to that. And that's subject perhaps for another broadcast, but that's my perspective on it.
That's a good perspective. Linda, what do you think about that before we pivot?
I think all of it is possible. The extraterrestrial, interdimensional. Certainly, I have no doubt there was a fairly advanced race of humans at one point. You read
You think a breakaway civilization?
I'm not sure, but when you read the ancient Indian texts of the Vimanas, and that was history to them. That was the truth. So yeah, that could be a possibility. And is there good and evil? Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
So and all the paranormal work I've done, a lot of things start with people say, one night I said, I'm opening myself to any spirit who wants to come in. And I said, would you leave your front door open with a welcome? You can't do that. No. And then they deal with the repercussions. So be careful with everything you do.
I do. All right. I want to pivot a little bit because I'm fascinated by this subject and I know very little about it. You wrote a book about it, and it is Animal Reactions to UFOs. Now, this isn't talked about, but I guess, Linda, there is a lot of information how animals have been reacting to their encounters. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was an offshoot of my work in the Hudson Valley. I was giving a lecture one night, and it just so happened that 3 or 4 cases in a row began with, well, my dog was going ballistic and I went outside and saw the UFO, or the horses or the cattle or all the animals in the forest were making bizarre sounds of alarm. And so I said, if it wasn't for animals, we'd miss half of these cases. And then, the cartoon light bulb went off over my head. Yeah. And what is, behind this? So I said, well, I have, the next day I'm going to go out and get every Animal Reactions to UFO book I can find. 0. No one had ever written a book about it. I'm like, how can this be? I found there was a good MUFON paper from the early 2000s. They had done a study. Some of the journalists had compiled just a list, but nobody said what could be behind this. So these happen to animals, from insects to humans, dogs, cats, worms, you name it. They have birds around the world. Like every country has had, animal reaction case. So the first thing I did was gather as many cases as I could, look for similarities. At first, dogs, they have this incredible hearing. So you think, that's it. It's high frequency, case closed. But so many bird reactions, I found out their hearing is rather pathetic. Humans can hear 20 to 20,000 hertz, roughly. Dogs and cats, 50, 60, 70,000 hertz, high frequency. Birds, maybe 2,000 hertz. So if we were just dealing with high frequency sounds, birds should not react at all because they can't. So, all right, what's the next? Vibration. That's a possibility. They're very sensitive to vibration. The thing, boil the whole book down into, I think it's magnetic fields. There's something called magnetoreception. Birds, take a homing pigeon, for example, they have magnetite in their beaks, which that's magnetized iron. It acts like little compasses.
Really?
They also have proteins in their eyes called cryptochromes. And they are, again, sensitive to magnetic fields. Homing pigeons literally see the Earth's magnetic fields. They have road maps in the sky. That's how they can, it's not magic, it's science. And all vertebrates have magnetoreception. Fish have it, insects have it. Basically, all animals, life on Earth have magnetoreception, and humans have it too. So how many times have you heard a witness say, I just sensed something was off or something was happening, and then I saw the UFO? And we know they produce electromagnetic fields, through car interference, radio, compasses going wild. So I think that is the key that they sent. Now, they live by their magnetic fields. Can you imagine when a strong, I'll just use the term alien, we'll say unnatural magnetic field enters them? It has to be completely disorienting and distressing. So there's other things involved, but I think that's the main thing.
Now, you wrote about, I believe you wrote about a dog that had an encounter with a UFO, and it got aggressive, and the dog was fried, literally fried from the inside out. Is that true?
Poor Topo the dog. Yes,
Topo.
This was in
That's
South
right.
America. It was a dairy farm. The cattle are going nuts, and the farmer looks, and there's this craft very low to the ground. It kind of had sparks of energy coming off it. Where other animals wanted to get away, Topo was the guard dog. And he went running towards it, barking like mad, and like 20 feet away from the craft, he stopped short, sat down, and started howling. And craft went away, and the next day, Topo was sluggish. He couldn't eat. He got worse. They brought him to the vet. His internal organs had been essentially burned, just horrible. And not only that, the layer of fat under the skin had melted and come out his pores.
Oh my God.
So he had probably been microwaved or some extreme radiation. And 3 days later, he laid down on the spot where this happened and died.
It's interesting. When we talk about UFOs behaving a certain way, and the meteorologist in me is immediately calculating the various things that are going on. Animals are also very sensitive to changes in barometric pressure. So are we, but we're talking animals here. And so when I hear a report of a UFO appearing in a cloud, I'm thinking, okay, what are clouds? Clouds are condensed water vapor. What causes condensation? Rapid cooling of the atmosphere. In this, was it Immaculate Constellation report that came out a few months back? They talked about with a certain type of UFO, the people who see it experience a rapid cooling around them and a drop in temperature. And so, okay, drop in temperature, condensation makes cloud, that connects. But also that drop in temperature affects us physiologically. Just very briefly here, for example, if you'll indulge me, if you've ever had an injury, an old football injury or surgery or something like that, when it heals, it forms scar tissue. Scar tissue is less elastic than healthy tissue. We're made up of cells. So the cell membranes of scar tissue are stiffer than uninjured membranes. When the barometric pressure changes, the cells expand or contract. So if a big storm is coming and you experience a rapid temperature drop, the healthy cells are expanding at a rate faster than the scar tissue cells. So people will be able to know when a storm is coming because their knee will ache or that shoulder they broke will ache. And so with animals, when they experience changes in their environment, they behave a certain way. If you ever go by a cow pasture and you see them all gathered in one corner, you look to see what direction they're facing and what direction their rear ends are facing. Their noses will be faced on the downward side of the approaching storm, and their rear ends will be facing into the wind. And they're doing that to shelter themselves because they're sensing the falling barometric pressure, and they want to be, as protected as they can out there in the field. So if UFOs are impacting the environment, even in a slight manner, Linda, you mentioned birds. I'm thinking particularly you mentioned their magnetic honing ability, but they also are very sensitive to pressure. So when a storm is coming, they'll fly lower to the ground. If you see birds high in the air, going to be a nice day. So when we talk about the behaviors of animals in the vicinities of UFOs, have you been able to identify any specific behavior that certain species exhibit?
The predominant behavior at the site or the nearness of a UFO is fear.
Okay.
Overwhelmingly so. There are sometimes it is suppression of their normal behavior. For example, guard dogs who would normally want to, tear something apart, just lie down and are quiet, which is very unusual. And in a tiny percentage, there seems to be an attraction. For example, there was a case in Florida where this woman saw a rectangular craft, which I think is a whole other different animal, the rectangular craft. And she and the dog and the cat felt drawn to it and started they felt euphoria. They were ecstatic. She was, and clearly the dog and the cat were drawn to this, and the craft moved off, which is fortunate because in the following days, she started losing clumps of hair and was very ill. So she didn't mention what happened to the dog and the cat, but clearly there was some type of radiation involved. Whether I'd hate to think that the craft was drawing these creatures to it. I'm hoping it was a collateral damage and realized when they got too close, it took off. But yeah, I think animals, through pressure, through vibration, through magnetic fields, cats can even see different, like they've tested cats can see X-rays.
Really?
It's just, yes, it's remarkable. So there are even cases of fish jumping out of the water when a UFO comes. And, fish have those lateral lines, which senses vibration and pressure. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, the witness said that as this craft was coming near, they had fishing poles in a boat, and the poles were rattling in the boat. So some sort of vibration was going on. And he said for 100 feet around, the fish were jumping out of the water. So they were probably very agitated and distressed.
There's a question in the chat. There's a question in the chat I want to get to. And then I got there have been some stories about flocks of birds dropping dead or a mass of birds falling out of the sky. Linda, have that ever been connected to ufology or UFOs or anything?
Yes, I've heard of several cases where sightings occur, and either they'll find a field with dead birds or dead fish will be floating in a pond. Certainly that it doesn't happen often, but there are certainly, I'm sure you've probably heard of some sort of cases, Don.
Yeah, I have. And I was thinking while you were all speaking, there was another phenomenon that used to crop up in the 50s, early 60s, in connection and association with UFO events, something called angel hair. Have you all heard about that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, angel hair was a mystery. People would collect it, but then, like if they had it in a container or something, after a short time, this stuff would dissolve or evaporate. I don't know the best way to describe it, but almost like a fiberglass type material that would come as a UFO would fly over. This material would seemingly drop from the craft. Do you have any idea what that might have been? I haven't heard about it in years.
No, I haven't heard. I remember when I was a kid. Do you remember the show One Step Beyond?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I
yes,
do.
they did an episode of UFO and angel hair, and freaked me out. But in recent times, people have tried to explain it away as spider webs. Lots of spider webs spider webs would not completely vanish in a specimen jar. So there's amazing cases of this, and I don't know. It's just something the craft is expelling, some sort of waste. I don't know, but if I saw it, I wouldn't go grabbing it with my hands. But yeah, some really remarkable
Linda,
cases.
That's the problem with a lot of people that have really no real background in examining this field. The one thing that I've always been cognizant of, and I have had several UFO experiences, not close, thank God, but I've had a couple of dramatic sightings in the sky, and I've always been knowingly terrified about the possibility of harmful radiation coming from this. I've read stories where people, one case and example, as a matter of fact, I wrote about it in the magazine back in the very early 90s. It happened in Canada. A couple of Canadians were out in the woods. I don't know exactly what it was they were doing. They might have been lumberjacks, or they might have been hunters. But at any rate, they came across a landed craft. The one guy ran up to it. All right. And there were some, let me see, how do I describe this? There were like some vents there. Like if you were to make a pancake, the vents were kind of shaped like that. And as he ran up to it, this thing started to take off, and a blast of very hot air came out of these things. And then the guy ended up in the hospital. He had these big burns all over him. So, they're not necessarily really worried about your safety or health.
No.
That was the Falcon Lake incident where he had that grid burned into his chest.
Yeah.
Audrey,
you have to be very careful.
Yeah, I'm wondering if any of the people that you've interviewed over the years, Linda, have had mysterious death, died younger than they should have, or whatever, from unknown ailments or something that the doctors couldn't explain, that might have been brought on by close exposure to a UAP.
Yes, there was one girl who had an incident when she was very, very young, and then several other very close encounters, and she had multiple forms of cancer and died very young. A lot of, look at researchers, people who've been doing this for a while, thyroid problems, cancers. So
Havana syndrome.
So it's something. It's just, but not too many early deaths. That one, though, in particular, and I had spoken to her before she died.
We only got a couple minutes left. Go ahead, Padre.
I know we're low on time here, so I just wanted to conclude my remarks with, as you look at the valley now, the Hudson Valley, do you think UAP activity is increasing, decreasing, or staying the same from the past years?
A couple of years ago, I think it was increasing. Now I think it's staying the same. It's constant, but nothing of the levels of the 1980s.
Okay.
I want to just pivot, and we only have a short time, but you've written a book on ghosts, and that's one thing I'm not really familiar with, but the ghosts of Rockland County. So have you done a lot of ghosts, paranormal?
Hundreds of investigations. I actually have 17 books on ghosts.
Little did I know.
You found one of them. Thank you. Yes, the Ghost Investigator series. So yeah.
Having Chris do some research.
Yeah. Damn, Chris.
That is. I
don't like ghosts. That's why I don't do the research, Don. They don't bother me, and I don't bother them. I don't go in cemeteries looking for them, and they don't look for me. How's that? Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I go out looking for them. So it's fascinating. And, talk about consciousness. I think most of them are, conscious spirits who haven't moved on for some regret or some sudden death or something. But there are some nasty characters, and I don't deal with them.
How do you know if one is a nasty character?
Oh, Well, first of all, you listen to the homeowner or witnesses' statements, and if they run screaming out of the house in the middle of the night, I'll say, yeah, call somebody else.
Okay. I like that. Like I said, I don't bother them. They don't bother me, and I like that. I'm sort of like Switzerland. Stay over there and stuff. Padre, what about the ghosts? You?
Well, I believe that they're demonic apparitions that are taking forms of other things. We don't have time to go into it, but there are some examples in the Bible of that taking place. They will accommodate anybody by appearing as what they want to see. And it's just another effort to lead people astray. That's my perspective.
Oh, I'm telling you, Linda, that's one subject I don't want to get into. Really, I never wanted to investigate that. I don't like cemeteries. I don't like my wife took me to a place one time, and there was two things I had. She says, "Oh, we're going to go on a vacation. I got this beautiful hotel mapped out." And there was two things I didn't like about it. One, it didn't have an elevator. So you had to climb up God knows how many flights of stairs to get to your room with all the luggage. And the second thing, when I got up there, I go, this is a beautiful room. Oh, yeah, this room is supposed to be haunted. What? It's supposed to be what? Haunted. And I'm not staying here. Sorry. And I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. I was like, if there's a lamp I could grab and throw it at it or something, or, nah, ghosts and me don't get along. I guess that's it and stuff. Well, we're out of time after that great ghost story. Linda, thank you so much for being with us tonight on UAP.
It was a real pleasure, Linda.
Thank you. You're all on my trusted list now.
Lovely to meet you.
We love ripping the Band-Aid off of stuff and just giving our opinions and stuff like that. So it's great. Folks, that's our show. Hey, when you see our show, go to kgradb.com and watch it and enjoy it. And if you got any comments, please let us know. For the entire team here, good night.